What you see here is a trickle of what we produced in the last wet season.
Massive rice pyramids unveiled in January as payback of loans rice farmers borrowed to expand their production. The federal government claimed that rice production has increased to over 7.5 million metric tons yearly, from less than 4 million metric tons recorded in 2015, prior to the introduction of Anchor Borrowers program. The low-interest loans had helped the farmers to more than double their average yield of rice, fighting armed herders on their way to success. And so during this year's planting season, they were more than happy to plant. None of them expected a deadly flood. Since August, more than 270 kilometers of cropland along the Benue and Niger rivers have been flooded. Every farmland within about 3 kilometers on each side of the riverbanks inundated.
You are all right. Look at it.
We stopped at the farm of 30-year-old father of 7, Umar in Opakabi, outside the town of Loko in Nasarawa State. He's one of thousands of smallholder farmers who benefited from the Anchor Borrowers program and contributed to the rice pyramid as a member of the Rice Farmers Association. He has not only lost all the seeds planted, he has no idea how he will repay his 200,000 naira debt.
Then I was Abakane and then Baja Bakane and our family. Ngaya and Obaja Yipuna Bakana. Abonobana Gio Janganet and Abogi Mangacha Lubudi do, because I'm what I went among Bajuma. Got you a whole time on up there and Tama. Okay, healing out to the manje, Gunjabano into Hina.
Jubrin is one of the leaders of the Farmers Cooperative Societies in Opakabi. Is owing 500,000 naira. To repay their loans, every individual in Jubrin's 25-member cooperative society is expected to contribute 1850 kilograms bags of rice paddy for the duration of the loan. They were all hoping to complete repayment during the next harvest season. Although they have been blamed for not heeding the flood warnings, the farmers argue the warnings came after planting. More so, 46-year-old Jubrin says this flooding is uncommon.
Even last year, they told us that the water is going to be too much, overflowing. And last year, we ride machine, look at the road. Even the car passing this place. Even me, we are ride machine from here down to look down to the during Hamata. So we didn't believe on that until this thing that happened to us this year. If not, I told you that since I was born, only 2012 that I experienced it. If not, water never covered these villages.
Those that stay behind hope to make ends meet by fishing. And across the river from Loko in Nasarawa State to Agatu in Benue State, the story is not different. Smallholder farmers camping on riverbanks, praying that the water will recede. They are joined in this prayer by some other richer farmers. Organizing Secretary of Rice Farmers Association of Nigeria, Sam Yua, is one of those. He has 19.34 hectares of rice farm on the water in Makurdi.
The rice was coming up fine. Then suddenly this deluge came. It's not been easy. I saw the rice just submerging gradually until everything is underwater. The rice seeds I use actually are Faro 67. They are supposed to be flood-tolerant variety, but the tolerance is only for 2 weeks. We are talking about 8 weeks now. Definitely what is underwater can no longer be alive.
Across town, the Benue State Commissioner for Rural Development, whose investment was funded by Bank of Industry, is threatening to sue the federal government for losses he has incurred.
I'm going to court. Let the court say, Victor, you don't have a case. We cannot allow things to happen the way they happen in this nation. For once, we need to sit up. And if there are ways that we can push our authorities in this country to sit up and do what they need to do, then we need to do that.
Back on the road and more than 5 hours drive from Benue to Nasarawa State, we arrived Tunga. Farmers here do not have what it takes to sue the federal government. They can only plead.
Padashine. Really,
government did not come to our rescue,
some of these banks will come and arrest people here because we collected loan from them and there is no way of paying them back. So we were hoping government to come to our rescue so that the government will assist us in solving some of these problems. My real farm, our real farm here, maize farm, about 4 to 5 hectares of maize farm that has been submerged by flood.
The people here have completely lost all they have. Unfortunately, farming in Nigeria is a tedious task, and for the last 2 years, these farmers have not been having it good. They've barely survived the impact of COVID-19 on sales of their produce. They battled with herders to save their crops, only to lose it to floods. The fact is, if they do not get the help they need, not only will they fall into extreme poverty, everyone who depend on their produce for supply face scarcity and price increases. And these simply means more people will face extreme hunger across the country. From Tunga community in Nasarawa State, Ayola Kasim, Channels Television News.
All right, welcome back. So in context of that challenge, the federal government alongside the AFDB and some partners did launch a $520 million special agro-industrial processing zones. That program, there will be 7 states and the FCT that will feature in the first tranche of that. So to shed light on that and possible implications of what you just heard about the states who are going through challenges, farmers with flooding in different parts of the country. We've got Professor Oyebanji Oyelaron Oyeyinka, who is the Senior Special Advisor on Industrialization to the President of the AFDB. He joins us virtually. Good morning, Prof, and thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, but before, talking about this program, we just that report which we just heard and played, how farmers in different parts of the country are affected. Well, you know, before this flood, of course, there was a huge optimism, and there still is, by the way, concerning this launch of this special program, this agri program. But having seen the flood, you have those who will ask questions saying, oh, wait a minute, what do we then do? How is this program going to stand in the face of this kind of scenario, this flooding that just occurred, that may occur tomorrow? Well, I know you also have factored all that in. So what would your thoughts be on how this will play out in the light of what's going on today?
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Our sympathies go to all those families affected. But as you know, flooding is a natural phenomena, of course, preventable with technology, with all manner of other precautions that we need to take as societies. I believe, as it happened, for example, in 2012, when Dr. Additional was the Minister of Agriculture, remember we had very severe flooding in 2012. And many people were predicting very apocalyptic scenarios that, you know, there's going to be food shortage, crisis, and all of that. But using technology and science, at that time, the country was able to turn this around. And that was when the dry season farming was started, using exactly the receding flood that leaves a lot of alluvia on the ground, and also to use science. Now, as we speak, most of the time when things like this happen, there's a tendency for people to panic, which is understandable, especially those who are affected. But what we need to do now is actually to establish exactly how much of our farmland are affected, how much of the communities are affected, how much of the crops that have been planted have been destroyed. By the time you use precise measurement, it might be surprising to you. I don't know the facts for sure, that if we have those facts on our hands, we may panic less than we are doing now. As I said earlier, nobody wants any of these natural disasters. It's all over the world. but we need to use technology and science to mitigate the impact on our people and to ensure that we don't leave people to their own sufferings.
Now, about this special agro-industrial processing zones that's going to be launched. And yes, we know the states, even though you shed light on that as we proceed, states have a huge role to play here. But then we also see that the states and the government, the federal government as a matter of fact, now haven't seen how they're responding to this flooding scenario. You equally will have questions concerning their capacity to manage this kind of scenario. Because yes, you suggested, yeah, we have to deploy science, technology, and several others, policies and the likes. But looking at this response, are you concerned that this might cause or raise more questions on those members of the private sector who may want to invest in it? Because if they put in a huge amount of money, even your partners, if they put in a huge amount of money, they want to see a coordinated and better response. Will this be a source of concern to them, saying, look, if this happens, if this is how they will respond, maybe we'll need to do more?
No, I agree with you, Chamberlain. Look, the way society is designed is such that you have to mitigate risk. You have to put in place risk measures that will also anticipate these kinds of things. For the special agro-industrial processing zones, for example, as you said, and if I read between the lines, you are speaking about the capacity of the state.
Yes.
I'm talking of government to deal with issues. You and I know that, most developing countries like ours have not so much capacity. It's measured in terms of fragility of countries and all of that. We rank extremely very low. Yesterday, during the presentation, we launched this yesterday, actually, it's continuing today. As you can see, in terms of the Global Hunger Index, we are ranking extremely very low. So it speaks to the capacity of the state for service delivery. But I don't want us to focus too much on that negativity. It's actually very depressing that a country like ours will be featuring so low on nutrition and food security. We should not be where we are. That's clear to me. But it shouldn't stop us also from action. And I want to thank you and your colleagues. We've been together on this journey for the last 3 years. I know in the beginning that, you used to grill me a lot on how this will happen. And I know that you had always been, but, what I want to show you now is that the model we chose, because we factored all this in. As a matter of fact, when I was briefed to be part of all of this, we took very strong steps to ensure that we don't end up like other projects. And it is bearing fruit. I can tell you as we speak, now that after drumming the message into all of our partners, states, governors, and everybody, that the message is sinking. For example, in Ogun State now, they are going to do groundbreaking of their own special agro-industrial processing zone, and it's almost 100% private sector finance. And I know for sure that there are other states that are already lining up to do exactly the same. Why? Because we got the theory right, we got the policy right, and then the practice will be right. So to speak to exactly what you're asking me, yes, we were very careful. That's why it took us so long, because we know that there is weak state capacity. There is difficulty, for example, in the bureaucratic management of big complex projects. So we were not going to fall into that trap. I am not saying it is a foolproof model that we're using, but we have taken extreme care to ensure that we don't go the way others have gone. So I really want to, so for all our readers, all our viewers and those who are watching, I want to assure you that what we have done in these last 3 years is beginning to bear fruit.
Well, $520 million, that certainly is a lot of money, and a pretty bold one at that, considering the fact that you're planning to launch this in rural communities. If I'm reading this right, the economic zones are going to be located in rural areas. How is this going to work, given the fact that, you know, rural areas are oftentimes challenged with infrastructure, I mean, access roads, electricity, etc. If this is going to be a processing zone, how are these matters of infrastructure also being taken into consideration?
No, thank you so much. Actually, the special agro-industrial process is a response to that. It's a response to the fact that peri-urban areas have very weak infrastructure. It is populated by very unskilled, mostly farmers. 70% of our smallholder farmers are based in that zone. And we have targeted the special agro-industrial processing zone to solve that problem. You know, the world look at Africa in a different way. We want to look at it in a different way. When you describe Africa, you talk about, you know, a dual structural economies, poor people, unskilled people in the rural areas. Our role is to change that narrative. We want to ensure that in the next 10 years, those areas you call peri-urban areas is totally transformed. You know, the normal, or what you might call the conventional special economic zones are usually located maybe somewhere close to a port or a seaport. So you import the inputs, intermediate inputs. For example, if you are doing a textile plant, you import the yarn and all of that, and then you turn it into ready-made garments and you export out. What we are doing in a very deliberate way is that we are targeting in those 8 states, and by the way, there will be 18 other states lining up, targeted policy to induce a structural transformation of those areas. It is one thing to be, we've been stuck with this for the last 40 years. We don't want to do palliatives. This is a fundamental change in the philosophy of development. It is deliberate that we are putting it there. So the weaknesses you described in those peri-urban areas is what we want to solve: power, roads, irrigation, all of that. So what do? We have 2 sides to the SAPZs, as we call it. There is that fundamental part of production, agricultural production. The small communities, small farming communities, we are going to build in those areas with this money you are describing, what we call agri-transformation centers. Those are areas where you put warehouses, storage, dryers, because, you know, one of the biggest problems of farmers is post-harvest losses. So we want to mitigate that. And also connect those ATCs, agri-transformation, to the main hub. The hub is now where you have the factories. As I speak to you, for example, the case of this state I was mentioning, they already have almost 20-something companies already lining up, and we expect that this is going to happen. So in the main hub, you now bridge that divide because we have a huge divide. The society is divided: rural, urban, poor, rich, all of that. The idea of the SAPZ is that with roads, with transportation, with logistics, we will bridge that gap between those smallholder communities, poor folks who have on their own cannot do this by themselves. We want to help them create communities that can react and then to prosper. In fact, as we always describe it, zones of misery, we want to turn them to zones of prosperity. That is the aim. That is the goal. And we hope that in the next 10 years, as the Vice President eloquently described it yesterday, we will have dealt a huge blow to poverty in those communities.
And we cannot help but hope along with you, because we do know that if this plan works out, I mean, it has the capacity to truly transform our rural areas. And maybe we could be seeing an urban-rural migration this time around instead of a rural-urban migration, which is what we've witnessed over the years. However, you know, even while we try to be hopeful, we still cannot but help look at the situation we have found ourselves in, especially in rural communities down south, south of the River Niger and south of the River Benue. A lot of companies and smallholder farmers who have put in quite a lot of hope into their investment in agriculture this year might be holding the short end of the stick when harvest comes in. Have you also been able to think about scenarios like this in terms of where this SAPZs are going to be sited and perhaps how, you know, this sort of risks can be mitigated?
No, thank you, Mokwe. I think, yes. You know, one of the reasons why we took so long is that bank-funded projects, and I'm not talking about AFDB alone, all the other partners also have the same processes. You have to do environmental studies. You have to have clear environmental impact assessment. You have to have feasibility studies that shows that the location that you have chosen, the commodities that you are targeting, they can stand the test of sustainability over time. So yes, indeed, we have actually taken all of this into account. Of course, you cannot predict the future all the time. The conflicts we are having all over the world now is largely also caused by climate change. It's caused by human-made issues. Farming practices that are not sustainable, cutting down trees and all of that. Again, also as a result of poverty. When people don't have gas to cook, they don't have whatever to deal with their lives, they resort to all manner of things. Yes, so to answer your question directly, we have done very extensive, we call it SSA, Environmental and Social Impact Assessment, and also taking account of the possibilities of all these kinds of things. So the locations where you're going to have the SAPZs, they provide those zones of comfort for people to produce. And I know people also ask me about security. Much of the time, zones are actually fenced around, you know, in terms of, and of course, given the peculiarity of what we have found ourselves in terms of security in Nigeria, we are going to also be taking mitigating steps also to ensure that even the adjoining communities, as you have seen in some communities now in Nigeria, where they have rangers or something as they call them, to ensure that people can go about their lives without threat of being killed and all of that. But our hope is that these things will be a thing of the past, and that we can actually live our lives, these communities, in peace. But yes, we have taken account of the location. They were deliberately chosen by each state. The commodities were deliberately chosen. And in fact, in cases where there was, we had all kinds of conversations around, no, you cannot be here, you sure have to be here because of so and so. A lot of expertise, knowledge, experiences have actually gone into determining the locations and the communities and the commodities.
I think that leads straight away, Prof, into my question around insurance. Because as you said, no one ever foresaw this quantum of flooding all over the nation. This program was supposed to be launched in February, and 9 months after, here we are.
I can't hear you, Ayo.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I said, no one ever foresaw the quantum of flooding that we have now in our hands compared to 9 months ago when the SAPZ was supposed to have been launched. But so no one ever knew that the kind of flooding that is happening right now would happen. But here we are. And you said, even though those places have been carefully selected, you also mentioned that no one can really predict, you know, the climate, what's going to happen and all of that. Is there any kind of insurance programs to insulate people's investments? Because as you said, it's government-enabled, private sector-led. So is there any kind of insurance programs that can insulate people's investments?
Yes, so there are several phases to this project. Where we are now, we have chosen locations based on, as I said earlier, on very clear technical criteria. Then you move on to a situation now where you have to choose the zone builders, those who construct the zones. And many states are already going through that on that pathway. And then you now need to also attract zone tenants, people who will be the operators, both on the production side and the processing side. So, and then you have a facility manager. So now, so across all of that chain of activities, one will expect that big businesses, you are going to be insuring your business. For example, for smallholders, yes, we have put in place insurance risk. We are working with NASAL for such an insurance. For the bigger players, of course, they will also ensure that they insure their businesses. So, but, you know, as I said earlier, one of the things we did with the environmental and social impact assessment and the feasibility is to choose those locations very carefully to ensure that these kinds of things do not really affect those kinds of communities that we are targeting. But of course, like I said, there's one thing to close out the hubs. The hubs are usually the center. You have to adjoin also to all the farming communities within 50 kilometers, 20, 70 kilometers. So things can happen. But what we have learned in history is that, you know, you have to use knowledge, science, technology to ensure that you mitigate those risks by building dams, by ensuring that you build proper, you know, properly channeling rains and stuff to ensure that you don't destroy investments. So beyond the risk and the monetary fiduciary risk that you want to mitigate, you also want to ensure that you use science and technology, as I said earlier in this program, for prevention. Well, so that's how I can describe that. I'm not sure whether I answered your questions fully.
As you said, I mean, it's just the start of the conversation. Over time, we'll get better insight into it. But one other question that comes to mind, I don't know if we'll be able to take it before, you know, it's break time, but is this. You said this program is government-enabled, private sector-led. I'd like you to explain that in a way that anyone who wants to get on the program is not afraid that he's going to be frustrated through some government bureaucracy into getting into the program. So how does it work really, such that, I mean, just as you said, it is government-enabled, but it is private sector-led. How does that work?
So the government of this, and like I said, we're already in 18 countries. It's not just Nigeria. As you heard Dr. Additional say on his video message yesterday, we are in 18 countries. We've put in close to $1 billion. Now, the funding, the financing is guaranteed by the federal government in the case of Nigeria. But the states are the ones who take these loans, very, you know, concessionary loans. So in that sense, the government of Nigeria has used its leverage and sovereign power to take the loan. You know, private individuals could also take loans from the bank, for example. But in case of complex big projects like this, the federal government of Nigeria had used its own power to take the loan. And then we designed this model to ensure that it is not being run in a bureaucratic manner. So basically, the framework of the SAPZ is that, yes, the catalytic funding, in fact, that's the best way to describe it. The catalytic funding, the 70 million, 50 million per state that we are giving, is just the seed. So you can see that as the seed funding or the catalytic funding to provide basic infrastructure within the core of the zones, the road, the administrative offices, the customs center. And by the way, it will operate almost like a secondary city on its own. It's going to have its own customs, immigration, where you do your one, and we've seen it work in other areas. And we are going to ensure that it works here. So beyond that now, what we have designed is that the ownership of the zone is, in terms of government ownership, is very limited. I'm not going to mention figures, but like I said to you, for example, in Ogun State, they are willing to even cede almost 100% to the private actor that has come. We have a lot of global players. So those global players will lead the building, the construction. We call it DBO, design, build, and operate, those zones. For the very reason that you have been afraid of, for 3 years, you have been always cracking my head and asking me how it's going to work. So, but as I said, we are seeing it now. So government has enabled it. Government uses power as the biggest shareholder in African Development Bank, as a big shareholder in AFDB and IFAD and all of that, to attract these partners. The AFDB has used its own leveraging power to lead this project. So that's why we call it government enabled. But at the end of the day, the idea of governance is for you to provide the ecosystem for the private sector to operate without trouble. You know, I think ideologically, we've always had a problem in this country. People tend to see the private as an enemy of some kind. And I think it's a very foolish idea, actually. The private sector, they are also Nigerians. They are young people. In fact, how many people can government actually employ? So, but I know that from my interaction on this project, there's a very clear understanding by all the officials we talk about, both at the federal state, that yes, this is the way to go. You know, it's taken a while, but I know now that it is clearly understood that, you know, a government is not designed to be running business.
Right.
The government has so much trouble on its hand already. Look at this
Prof, if we could break this down.
Look at economy. Look at FX.
Right.
Look at all of this. So, well, how do you run an economy? You are not trained to run a business on a daily basis. So I think this message is very clear.
All right.
So as I said to you, for most governments, the ownership of those zones will be probably less than 20% or even less.
Okay, Prof, if we can break this down even
that's
further.
Why we say it's private sector driven.
Right. If we can break this down even further, because I think participation is key for the various players, smallholders, or even the big players in all of this. So looking at the figures, essentially, I think this conversation is ensuring that the SAPZs, or the SAPZ is essentially easy peasy for people to jump in. That's free of charge to use anyway. So I'm looking at the funds. AFDB providing $210 million. The Islamic Development Bank, IFAD, providing $310 million. I see federal government also $18 million in all of this. And you've talked about the example in Ogun State, that this is essentially even generally private sector. They're providing the funding. So the fund provided by the different banks, what is it going into? Because I imagine someone who wants to participate thinking, oh, would I be able to access these loans? Or essentially, I will use my own funds to do business, and the loan from the AFDB, which is gotten through the federal government, will be used to build infrastructure. So if I want to participate, how do I go about it? Can I access the loans, or I use my money for business, and then the zone is created with the loan you're providing? How does it work, really?
So let me thanks a lot, Hardy. So the loan, this segment by these partners is to provide that basic platform. You know, it's like building an airport, and then you have various airlines coming into the airport. Air this, air that, you know, but you have to provide that platform, the runways, all kinds of things, you know, or you build your Hilton hotel, as I said one day, you know, you have to put all of those infrastructure in place, the hotel, a huge hotel or a huge supermarket with several shops. So what you want to do is to create that ecosystem where the tenants, what we call zone tenants, in this case now, occupants of those shops and stores and all of that in, say, a supermarket, we come in and operate. Now, so the loan we are taking is to build the structure, either the hotel, whether the supermarket, you know, to ensure that you can have occupants in those in that structure. So you can have, say, 50, 20, 30 different zone tenants occupying the zones. So the critical problem, as you have always observed us, that we have in this country is that infrastructure. So the loan itself is going to be used to do that. Provide the rooms, provide the power, let there be running water, 24 hours, let there be security. And then those of you who are interested in operating a factory, you want to produce cassava to turn it to starch, to sorbitol, to fructose, to glucose, you can then come in and rent a shed, a factory built on 1 hectare, for example. So you come in there. So that's where the zone tenants that you are talking about comes in. So you say, how do I get in? Now, so we now have also Bank of Industry has committed $1 billion more to say, look, for every zone tenant who wants to come into that space to produce, because we know they are guaranteed power, water, security, we are happy to lend them money at also, again, at concessionary rate. There are other players also who actually could have generated their own money from elsewhere, but now they have the comfort to just move into, say, a huge space within that supermarket to simply operate their business. So what we are guaranteeing is that we want to ensure that people can produce and be competitive with their counterparts anywhere in the world. That is the idea of a clustering of actors within a geographic zone. It's an idea that is several decades old. As I've mentioned on this program many times, today, as we speak, Vietnam has close to 380 industrial parks. In Africa here, we have several now already springing up. Even in this country, we have Lekki Free Zone and all of that. So, but in our case, this SAPZ is devoted to processing agri-commodities. That's why we call it Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zone. It is to take agriculture from its primitive phase, where we have been stuck for 40 years, into a modern processing system. It is to ensure that smallholders are cared for, give them good seeds. Seed is the heart of production. Irrigation, fertilizer, mechanization, all of those things that fostered the Green Revolution in Asia almost 40 years ago. So, but as far as we are concerned, it's not too late. What others have done in 30, 40 years, we can do it in the next 10 years because we've learned, we are learning. And it's not that we are starting from ground zero. So this is why the ecosystem of SAPZ tend to take account of almost all of those issues. You know, the connection of small to big holders, the connection of the linkage, logistic linkages of the communities to hubs. So those who will need the loan, those who will need assistance for production, it's a different set of things. So, and we're also assisting with that. In fact, for the small community, we are going to be assisting to put them into cooperative, to associations, and all of that. That's what the IFAD is doing. You're asking me about the different players here. They all have different interests, but everything comes together within the SAPZ. IFAD, for example, they have expertise and experience and interest in helping smallholder farmers. They've done it all over the world. And we are working with them to do that same year. In our case, the major thing is to bring all of these players together into one space. And I really want to be, I want to thank all these partners again for working with us. I want to thank all of you for always coming at me to ask me, how do you do this? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it will be exciting and interesting to see this actually go on, because, I mean, whatever makes the country work and make everything go, we will always support it. And as a matter of fact, this is a flagship program in Africa, as you also have said, and that the mindset is agriculture has got to be seen as a business, as the president of AFDB always says. And so that is a mindset that players in that sector need to have. But we also do know that one of the four broad components of this is coordination and management. So if I could also ask you as we wrap up on this one, what would you say is the key expected outputs for the first phase of this program on the part of everyone who has participated in this one?
No, so thank you. Now you talked about coordination. So for each state, we have set up what we call a PIU, Project Implementation Unit, and we are funding those units. You have maybe 9-7 staff members who are chosen in a very competitive way. Some come from private, some come from the civil service, but they were chosen for their competence, who will be oversighting and reporting, and also coordination with the contractors who will build and those who manage. So what we expect is that in the next couple of years, we are going to see these zones all over the country. We are going to see these 8 zones built rapidly in the next 3 years. We are going to see 18 other states also lining up, because now we have learned our lesson. We know we can do this faster to get them to project closure. And then we're going to see a transformed rural areas. We don't want to be described as rural, you know. Yeah, there will always be rural, but you want to be, even if people still want to live in villages, there has to be modern villages. So what we want to create are secondary cities. We want to see high quality living standards among our people. We want to see a situation where even people, as Mokwe was describing, will be moving away from Lagos, Ibadan, Sokoto, the capitals, back to their villages because there's jobs. And by the way, you know, in all of those special zones, there will be clinics, there will be schools, there will be all those service centers that makes life livable for the ordinary citizen.
All right, a very, very fine place to let it go. We look forward to the project taking shape sooner rather than later, and however long it takes. We want to thank you for coming on, Professor Oyebanji Oyelaron Oyeyinka, who is the Senior Special Advisor on Industrialization to the President of the AFDB. Always a pleasure talking to you, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We will be back in just a moment. Stay with us.